Welcome to Tales from the Tarot podcast, where you can learn about the tarot not from a book, but from people's lives. I'm your host, Tara, and I invite you to join me and my guests as we break down the human experience through story, myth, and archetypes. Betsy Rose is a certified Reiki master and teacher. In addition, she's also a 200-hour yoga teacher, intuitive healer, and holistic health coach. She's also a self-taught astrologist and a tarot and oracle card reader. So Betsy, you did some more in-depth readings with me, and we looked into your, I call it soul cards. That just resonated with me. But essentially, we looked into your astrology placements, and then we looked at the tarot cards that matched, and it was so cool to go through that discovery with you. And ones that we found out for you were the Devil card and the Hierophant card. Yeah, go with the Capricorn energy, and then we also have the Five of Pentacles, which we are talking about today. Anything that really lights you up about finding out that these are your archetypes, or that you want to speak to about these?
For sure. And let me first say that going through that with you, those in-depth readings were amazing. And for anyone that's listening to this, I highly, highly, highly recommend, shameless plug, that you do those soul card readings with tarot. It's with Tara, sorry, Tara with tarot. And it's like a whole package, but I absolutely loved it. I love learning about myself, like understanding myself. I don't remember what Deepak Chopra book it is, but he shares this fable, and essentially it's like, if you pursue the point of the fable, I'm not going to try to butcher the fable, but if you pursue the goddess of knowledge, the goddess of wealth will follow. And so when you can learn about yourself, you can learn about, as an entrepreneur, as a Capricorn, I feel like this has always been kind of a key skill of mine, is learning about myself, knowing what my strengths are and knowing what my weaknesses are. And this just gave me a whole new perspective, your soul card readings did, on like more than that, but especially those things. So yes. So for one, it helps me make sense of a few things. And I hope it's okay. I'll probably dive into more of my sacred sexuality offerings and like those kind of practices too.
Do it.
Okay, cool. So yes, the Hierophant is that teacher aspect, and that is me. My mom used to beg me to become a elementary school teacher, and I was like, no, not for me. I don't like kids. And as I got older, I realized, oh, I want to teach adults. Like while I was in college, I thought, well, maybe I'll become like a adjunct professor or something and try that out. But once I started teaching yoga, I was like, oh, teaching spirituality is where it's at. And fun fact, in high school, when I used to do all of those, I forget what they're called, but they have a name, but they're the aptitude tests.
Oh yeah.
I used to take those aptitude tests, and I took several throughout my junior and senior year at different times of the year, different points, and they were different tests, each one. All of them said that I should be a clergyman. And I laughed at that. I so laughed at that because I was like, what does that even mean? Like, at the point, I was so rebellious as a teenager. I was like rejecting the church and like fighting with my parents every day. They were like, you gotta go to church. I was like, no, I don't. No, the fuck, I don't. So yeah, at that time it puzzled me. But once I became a yoga teacher and understood the spirituality aspect of that, there are many different paths and there's no one right path. there's just like what path is right for each individual, then that is when the Hierophant and like the clergymen started to become a very like it started to really resonate and make sense of why I got all those clergymen. And then the devil card, I mean, I've always had like a devilish streak. Um, going back to that lost child archetype that I mentioned earlier, my parents kind of labeled me like a bad child. I had undiagnosed ADHD, so I was always busy. I was always getting into things. Like I would get bored, and my favorite thing to do was just go into my parents' closets because my mom was like, I get, how do I say it? She's like a low key hoarder, but not like full blown. She's just like any space or crevice where something can be shoved into, it's just packed. So you never know what treasures you would find. So back to that adventurer spirit, I was always treasure hunting in my parents' closet. Never knew what I would find. There is this fun little story of when I was a kid, this little devilish aspect. I mean, I was under the age of 5 or 6. I mean, I was 5 or 6 or younger, so I don't remember the age, but I had this fascination with money. Like I was starting to learn what it was. I knew what some coins were, but other than that, I was just fascinated with money. And I don't remember this is how the story goes, but I went to my dad, and he was the breadwinner. He was a truck driver, over the road truck driver. So he would leave for like a week, upwards of a week at a time, but mostly come home on the weekends. Sometimes he'd be gone for longer, sometimes it'd be 2 weeks. But I went to my dad and was like, Dad, can I have all your monies? And like I had all the coins that he always just dropped on his dresser, right? Because cash was a thing then. And he was like, sure, baby, you could have all my monies. And then it was the next day he left for work and was going to be gone for a week or more. And he got, he said he was like 100 miles away or something, got to the next gas station and went to pay for his gas. And he had no money in his wallet because he told me that I could have it all. So I took it. And so, and I do remember knowing when they told the story that in my little devilish mind, I knew what I was doing. I knew I was tricking him. So I have some of that trickster energy. I was tricking him, knowing that he would be okay with me coming forward with all this change and be like, can I have all your monies? And I used my cuteness to like.
That's adorable and funny. I love that.
So it shines through even at a young age. Loki is the god that it's the trickster god that I like to relate to. I know I have some of that Loki trickster energy. And
so talk about that more. So what is that energy exactly? How would you describe that archetype?
It's very playful. I am mostly doing things to get like a rise out of people or annoy them, not necessarily doing things to and like hurt on a deep level, but it is a little irresponsible in the sense that things can typically go awry when you're trying to trick people. Maybe they don't actually act or move in the way, and then I end up carrying on more guilt and shame and pain than I intended when I was just trying to do something kind of playful that maybe the other person like wasn't in the mood, or there's a number of different things. And that's how Loki's stories often go, is he's trying to trick somebody. It doesn't work out. So then he gets cast as like a bad figure. And so that I think is how the bad child came about, like being labeled bad as a kid. And then that just continued to kind of follow me and be that black sheep, if you will, of my family. And yeah, it's still to this day that case. And Loki is definitely, Loki above all, he was like adopted. He wasn't even bloodline with his immediate family. And so yeah, it's very similar for me. I feel like I was adopted.
It's funny, like the trickster archetype, like what is the line between when it's fun and playful and the other person laughs or it's fun and then it gets not fun or like annoying, or like what is that line? I mean, I know my sister used to trick me all the time when we were teenagers. Like she like I had tissue paper that I used to blot my lipstick on or whatever, and she put boogers on it.
Yes, yes. So tricks, in a sense, they are always kind of shrouded in shadow, and they might require like a lie, right? So you might, sarcasm is one other aspect that I can think of that can be kind of trickster, where you say the exact opposite of what you mean, but you say it in a tone that's like clearly not what you mean, I guess.
Yeah, it's just like playful, I guess, is just what it seems like to me.
Yeah, I'd say it's to sum it up, I'd say it's a playful dark energy.
Mm-hmm. And then it can be light too. I know Elizabeth Gilbert, do you know who she is? She did Eat, Pray, Love.
Yes, yeah.
Has I think it's a recording on the Calm app, or she probably wrote a book too about this, but she talks about the trickster archetype and how it's the artist. It's like the playful artist, and how to learn to laugh and dance and kind of like be more lighthearted with your art, and not have this big end goal that you're like so serious. And it seems to me like the trickster is when we lose that serious ego, the ego that's so serious. Makes me think of the tower and the tower card, but like that, that we're trying to build, and the trickster just kind of like doesn't care about that. Like it's happy and playful, and that's the whole point of, that's like why we're all here, and that's what keeps us young, and and keeps us from getting heart attacks when we're older, and like
No, yeah, absolutely, is to just like not take things so seriously. I mean, there's like a ton of different characters that are coming to my mind right now. Even the Joker, why so serious? And I mean, he was a villain, but again, misunderstood, outcast, definitely falls into that type of archetype. And I love where this conversation has gone. I didn't expect it to go here at all, but I'm definitely going to look into the Elizabeth Gilbert, because there is, just like with everything, there is a light and a dark side to it. Robin Williams, the late Robin Williams, is another actor who comes to mind, who just brought so much joy, but there was also this like unseen kind of outcast sadness, depression that he moved through. So yeah, just
I'm getting also sorry, not to
yes.
Well, like animal medicine. I think sometimes when I'm here, there's a lot of land here where I live, and I'll look out the window and I'll see like a fox or a coyote, and they'll jump, and it's so funny looking. It's like they jump up. And it's very playful. And I know the coyote is the trickster archetype as well. So yeah, it's just cool to see.
Yeah, definitely. What came to mind as you were sharing that story is monkeys. So when I was in Costa Rica back in 2015, quite a while ago, we went to a beach, and they warned us. They were like, there are these monkeys, and you have to always have somebody with your stuff, like, put like a group of you all need to put your stuff together and just like take shifts watching your stuff, or it's going to end up in the trees and you're never going to get it again. And it did happen to like a couple of other tourists who were there that were not in our group, and they thought it was cute, but then they realized they weren't getting their stuff back, and they started freaking out. So that is another side of that trickster energy of like, it seems really funny and cute and like, oh my gosh, this is adorable. And then you have this oh shit moment and you're like, oh, there are very real consequences to this. But thinking of those unconscious patterns that are lurking, just below the surface. And they say, from again the trauma work that I've done on myself, it's really unlearning or bringing those patterns to the surface, to the conscious, to the light, and then deciding how to integrate, release, and work through and unlearn, and then learn something new to fit in its place.
Yeah.
That is a big aspect of that. So when the trickster energy happens, you know what you're doing at first. You're just being playful and like trying to play a trick on somebody, but you don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be, and that can be the part that becomes out of your control.
I like what you were saying about power and control, or control, chaos and order too. We definitely see the order in the Hierophant card, and the chaos in the Devil for sure.
Yes, yeah, and the control with like the chains. So in the Devil card,
Control in both, I guess. Yeah, actually.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'd say the unconscious part, you can also think of that as like your animal instinct as well. And so he's actually has their entire bodies chained. So those unconscious patterns, I said we would talk about sex, so let's bring that up. I mean, I've always been a very sexual individual. I've always had a high sex drive, and that kind of made me feel like an outcast. Didn't really feel like I could speak to a lot of people about that because there's so much shame in my community growing up. Definitely could not talk to my parents. So, masturbation and even watching porn at a young age, because I was growing up right around that time when computers were coming into homes. Yeah. And so it was very much like this just animal instinct. And there were times where I would masturbate just like so much in a day. I mean, I just had so much pent up like sexual energy and what have you. But I know that for some that becomes like a real serious addiction. And there's definitely a point in my life where I realized, I was like, oh man, I feel like I am a slave to my own sex drive, at times. So that was like my body, I didn't have the control of when and how much time I was going to spend on releasing the sexual energy. And so that that was a struggle for me it has been throughout my life. Once I learned more became a yoga teacher and learned more just about my own body, because that's like what a lot of it was unlocked. Things became more conscious. My mind had more control over the body. So anyways, my point being is that the Hierophant displays that control over the mind, and there's also positive and negatives to that. You have mind control from like brainwashing and all kinds of things, all the way
society.
Yes, exactly. And then with the Devil, you have like your own, your unconscious, what your body is a slave to because of your unconscious, what's in your unconscious. So
that's deep. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do love all of the different, there's so many layers, right? Like you said, there's chaos and order, control, uncontrolled, conscious, unconscious.
Where do you think the self-worth piece falls in the Devil and the Hierophant?
Ooh, so let me speak to the Hierophant first. So, I mean, growing up in this pretty religious household, My parents heavily involved in the church, still are to this day. It's great. I'm happy for them. It wasn't for me because there was a lot of shame that was used in through the religion to like just make you constantly feel unworthy, and like you had to constantly strive and be afraid in order to, I don't know, live your life, I guess.
In order to be accepted as part of the group, or
Yeah, to be accepted, and you had to like confess your sins. And I mean, I know it works for some people. It just seemed like a weird way to go about things. And then growing up, like with my parents, they were always fighting and arguing and never dealt with the stuff that was like emotionally deeper. And like there was just all this chaos, right, in our household, but there was all this order facing out to the world because we were in the church and we followed all these things. So yeah, there's that. And then in terms of the devil card, there was like this aspect of being a slave to your own subconscious. And like, so the Hierophant was the outward facing world, the world that I grew up in. It was brainwashing all through the mind. I won't go too far into it, but I was raised. There's quite a bit of narcissism that went on in my family. They had all their unhealed patterns and what have you, of not working with the darkness, right? Like, let's just ignore it and pretend like it's not there, right? And that's kind of what was that?
spiritual bypass.
Yes, spiritual bypassing. Thank you. That's the right term. So there was a lot of spiritual bypassing going on, just to say that we have this status or we present in this certain way, when really there's all this chaos and turmoil happening behind the scenes. Because and there's a lot of anger. So like there was never any physical abuse other than like getting whoopings or getting spankings. But there was definitely a lot of emotional abuse. And so that's why I felt like the lost child. I was happy to run away from that. Like it wasn't something, but I still miss the joys of having like happy parents and parents that got along and people who dealt with their shit and learning how to do that myself. But instead, now I'm here bringing everything I was taught in that chaos and what unconscious patterns I learned from growing up in that. I'm now doing the work. So in a sense, I'm kind of a slave to doing that work in the darkness and bringing it to light. And it does feel like a ball and chain. And I realized probably about a year ago that I've created this life to like buck the system. I've created this life that gives me freedom, where I can make money and still function in this society, but I don't have to feel like I have to keep up with the Joneses or make $1 million. I can be present. I'm connected with myself spiritually, and I have a different version of wealth than most people do. But there is still this aspect of me that feels like I'm not worthy of those things. And so I still have this drive to like do better, get better. It's kind of what drives the rat race, if you will, always doing. And I'm finally learning part of that wealth is knowing that it's okay to rest. And it's okay to it's even okay to take a break from doing your unconscious dark work, like shadow work.
And you helped me with that so much the other day when you suggested that I take a 3-day break from social media and put out a message in the stories just to let people know that. And it really was amazing to have that mission given to me to do that. And yeah.
Good. Yeah. I sometimes need to take my own advice.
That self-worth piece, I feel, can take us back to the 5 of Pentacles too, which is connected to the devil and the Hierophant. This the card of lack or scarcity or poverty, which is a kind of, you do see this thing of being shunned from society. And that's like kind of like the struggle you have to face when you do what you're doing, like being the entrepreneur, bucking the system, making your own path, is you have to face, and I don't mean to say shunned, like people are throwing stones at you or shaming you, but like just in that sense to where you do feel like an outcast. And so how does self-worth do that dance with that process? That's interesting. It's like that maybe is a point where we increase our capacity for self-worth, because we are going to that place where we are not getting validated by others anymore, and we're having to get it ourselves. I mean, we are kind of forced to, in a way, once we've made that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's, for me, it's not like I'm immune to it. I go through bouts of depression, and there's like so many things I want to say, but my brain is suddenly empty around it. And I think that's because we might be touching on like an edge.
I think the edge might be shame that we're coming upon, which is a big piece of the devil archetype. It might be one of the only archetypes that helps us access shame.
Yes, feeling rejected, outcast, leaves you with this like heavy feeling. I know for me, shame was like the number one tool used on me as a child to try to get me to fall in line. And I mean, it didn't really work, thank God, but it still took its toll on me mentally, emotionally, physically, even. And I know that every single one of us on this planet has experiences with shame. I was taught to be so far removed from my emotions that it wasn't until this year I started to realize when shame appears, my immediate reaction, so my unconscious way of reacting to it, is to have anger boil up and then use that anger to project outward. And essentially it's a survival tactic to get me away and out of that feeling of shame by transforming it into some sort of fire, I guess, that's also toxic. But I mean, that is kind of the example that I grew up with from my parents, was that, shame is bad. And to like use it as a tool, especially to prevent or to keep me away from any sort of sexual urges or expressing myself, and being someone who is so, and still is to this day, but has such a high sex drive. You know, that shame is so deeply ingrained. Yeah. Honestly, learning and being in the BDSM community, the kink community, and before 50 Shades of Grey came out and kind of brought it, I guess you could say, more mainstream, I was lucky to be in a community where they taught on structure, the structure of BDSM and how to curate and how to navigate through, because they were very aware that, why do people do these kinks? Well, there's also an emotional drive underneath, and there's also an unknown, right? There's also the unknown of what emotions are going to be brought up by said kink, because you never know. I'll give you an example. I'm both sadistic and masochistic. Masochistic meaning I enjoy receiving pain. Sadistic meaning I enjoy giving pain. So I identify naturally as a femdom or dominatrix, if for those who might not be super familiar with the terms. And so when I am receiving pain, and we'll just say like through a spanking, and intentionally consenting to someone, even going as far as like bruising my bottom, it being that hard of multiple hits. And there is like ways to do this. It's not just like all unleashed as hard as you can go. It's not like that. There is a mix of pleasure and pain. So like soft touch and hard spanking. And so I've had experiences where receiving a hard spanking feels really exhilarating and gets me really energized. And I've had at a different time, completely different time, had that experience where it was then very cathartic. I was very fatigued afterwards, and emotionally, it just like I just cried and cried and cried and had such a great emotional release in a safe space where, you know, of course, like that's allowed. So just to give that example of ways that things that may appear like shameful or what have you, things that maybe society or even the church, since that's definitely a theme here, would deem as shameful, like receiving a spanking for the sense of pleasure, if you will, can actually end up being so cathartic and healthy as well. Doesn't just have to be, but those constructs, society and the church, only allow those things to be categorized as shameful and bad. So yeah, that's it.
And I think that's so interesting that there's an emotional component to kink. You know, I certainly didn't know that when I first started learning about kink. And it sounds like you are tapping into that devil, you know, unconscious stuff and the embodiment stuff with kink in that kind of way, like getting those spankings and then having it unleash these deeper unconscious sensations or feelings that actually open up the channels for maybe some blocked emotion to express out that maybe had been blocked for years, or who knows, or
yeah, definitely. And I mean that's going through, in the example that I gave, and a lot of experiences with kink, it's going through the body first and then letting the things just surface wherever the energy may be stuck in the body, and then allowing it to be emoted in a safe space. And because of the structure and the way that BDSM and the way that I learned it is set up. So yeah, so we'll just dive, since we're already here, we'll dive in. So during the Great Pause, I really, really got to experience my full femdom self, and even be at a point where I accepted that, oh, this is natural for me. In kink and BDSM, and as well as just if you zoom out and do the normal lens of society of like what roles women fall into and what roles men fall into. So if we're just talking regular vanilla relationships, you know, and what at least the religion that I grew up in taught me was that women are submissive and they're supposed to listen to everything their man or husband, you know, leads them on. He's the leader. And I know we're in very different times now, but just for the sake of these terms. And then men being more dominant, the leader, the, you know, yeah, all the things. So dominant, submission, and then taking that into the BDSM role, which is even deeper, right? Explores those constructs even deeper, and those roles, like you actually get to embody being fully submissive. We hold the devil card back up. Yeah. You get to embody being the slave, right? And those even look more, I know there's both a man and a woman there, but you know, you get to embody being that submissive, like I'm a slave. Was Britney Spears? I'm a slave. Cut that out.
I've heard it called worshipful erotic energy. That's one of the 12 erotic energies is worship.
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorites. As a femdom, I love being worshipped.
Oh,
Um,
I love worshiping.
where I was going is that I looked back, like I took a step back because let's see, I'm 31 now, and I started with kink when I was 21, just kind of being introduced to it. I was in partnership with somebody and I was trying to fit into this submissive role that I didn't get it. I was like, I don't get it, and typically women are, that's just typical, right? It's the stereotype. And if you're getting into something, just start with what is common. And again, this is another thing of me like
The
going again.
Yeah, and the stereotype is men on top, missionary, and men are heavier, stronger, bigger generally than women, and they're like suffocating her, and like,
Mhm.
and that's another thing that in tantra it's the opposite, you know.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
Woman gets
Um,
top and have all the room to move and like express and let that shakti flow. But yeah.
yeah, like the base, more of the structure. Like that's how I view like masculine energy. It's more structure, and the feminine is more like free flowing and able to express. And there is this beautiful thing about BDSM where I have witnessed many submissive women who love it. They love, love, love it. And there's a good majority of women who naturally fall in to being submissive. And there's times when I can, it takes a very rare dom, uh, very rare, like so rare I've never even met him. So, but when I looked back at all of the just stepping out of like the BDSM lens, and this took me years to take a moment to just say, I tried being submissive for probably 6 to 8 years and still never really understood it. So I never went too deep into, but around that time is when I started taking far more, going to conventions and taking like, gosh, I've probably got an associate's degree, let's say, of number of like classes under my belt just by going to these conventions and taking these different classes from basically like, it's like a college level class for an hour on different BDSM topics. And I just love it so much. And I've learned so much, and it just lit me up. And then I really got to understand like this more devilish side. And I looked back at all the women in my family, and this again, un-BDSM related, but looking at like the, how are their relationships led. And another term that I heard in the BDSM community, and also just being a feminist, was female led relationship. And I was like, when I read that, I was like, well, all my mom's sisters, she has four, and no, I'm sorry, she has three. She's the fourth one. And that was what a lot of the chaos and tension between my dad and my mom was like, her being there most of the time because right, he's over the road and like running the household, and then him coming home and being like, okay, this is what we're going to do now, and her being like, no, fuck you, like this is what we're doing, I've been
Yeah.
handling this shit all week and I need your help with this, that, and the other, and like the kids, and like you're not fucking going fishing. Like
Yeah.
that's the kind of like fighting that I grew up around because there was this tension between the the religion telling them that, well, dad is the dominant one and mom is the submissive one, and it just wasn't the case. Like when I looked at it through that lens of like, oh, in their vanilla relationships, all of my aunts, my other three aunts, all were female led relationships. Like their husbands super submissive. And not that they're not like dominant men or what have you, or masculine. They definitely were, but just
Well, I think there's this mistaken view in like the polarity communities too, and the neo tantra world, like where it's like the masculine is supposed to lead, the masculine is supposed to dominate in life and make the choices and direct the relationship. And no, it's not that. It's actually like that the woman is the oracle. She's the oracle, and she knows her intuition. Now, given that she does the inner work and she's in touch with it,
Right.
It's up to her to make those calls and then bring them to her partner. And then he goes into the masculine. Okay, how are we going to do this? Let's make it work. He's got the direction, the focus, the drive, and to make it work, but it's her calling the shots because she's the oracle.
Yep. But the devil card specifically, during the great pause, and I finally accepted that about myself. I guess it was during my Saturn return. So 28, 29, 30 years of age. So really, 31 now. So just happened. And accepting and then like embodying. Oh gosh, I don't think we'll have to save this for another one. We might have to like come back, record it, like put the same outfit on. And then
we can have you on again as a guest.
Yes. But the story of how I embodied my first ever actual BDSM scene with a partner, it was a private scene of me being dominant and being a femdom, was so exhilarating. And I'll leave you with this, like my cat brought a fucking bird in as I was praying to the goddess that I was praying to like give me strength and embody me. It was actually Freya, who I now have on my arm. Yeah, my cat brought in a bird and set it at my feet, and I was like, so anyways, that's a whole other story, but that's basically how my femdom kind of journey started, and it's just beginning. And I know that I will be on that journey for the rest of my life because it's such a it's an embodiment of the devil card where I'm not the slave. Like there's aspects of my life where I definitely still am, but I'm actually in that dominant position because it's natural to me. Like I was born into that.
I got chills when you said that.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support and explore my work further, you can subscribe to patreon.com/readings and rituals.